Hi, and welcome to the Right to Remain Silent podcast. I'm Jim Weber, your host and guide through actual accounts of intriguing and fascinating true crime stories as told by the law enforcement professional that experienced the event. The Right to Remain Silent podcast makes no exaggeration of fact, doesn't glamorize details, or sensationalize reality. The format here is basic. Real stories from real cops. Lastly, please don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, and share. Doing this will help me continue to provide you, the listener, with captivating and relevant true crime stories. Now, let's listen in on today's episode. Hi, and welcome to today's episode of the Right to Remain Silent podcast. Today's guest is Mr. Kenneth Strange Jr., a retired federal agent that worked for the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Justice as a special agent. During our conversation today, Ken will be discussing his participation in the Merida initiative and his involvement in training law enforcement officers and agencies in Mexico. Ken will also share details of a very interesting visit to the Altiplano Supermax federal pen near Toluca, Mexico. During that visit, Ken encountered three of the world's most notorious drug cartel kingpins. Ken, welcome to the podcast.
Jim, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Absolutely. And same here, same here. I'm excited about our conversation today. I think what I'll do is I'm going to read your bio. It's a super interesting bio here. And just so our listeners are familiar with who we're talking with today. All right.
Sounds good.
All right. Kenneth Strange Jr. is a former FBI and DOJ special agent and supervisor, private investigator, and award-winning author. A Spanish speaker and member of the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, he has recently published a best-selling true crime memoir, A Cop's Son, One G-Man's Fight Against Jihad, Global Fraud, and the Cartels. Ken served with three distinct and distinguished U.S. government agencies pursuing criminals and bad actors, including some of the most heinous criminals in the world. His service to those agencies brought him into direct conflict with jihadists, international fraudsters, and the cartels. His memoir has not only been hailed by law enforcement icons Ray Kelly, former two-time New York City Police Commissioner, and Bill Bratton, former New York City Police Commissioner and LA Police Chief, as page-gripping and a compelling memoir bound to entertain, but by other law enforcement officers, figures prominent in that genre as well. Ken's hobbies include hiking, reading, and traveling. He is married to an RN, has two adult children, and lives in Ventura County, California. He recently became a grandfather for the first time. Again, Ken, thanks and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim.
All right. I think what we'll do here is, first off, I like to ask our guests why they got into law enforcement. What caused Ken to become an FBI agent and also a DOJ special agent?
Right. That's an excellent question, and I would have to say the seed that kind of started all this, germinated this, was my father. My father was a police officer with the NYPD, New York Police Department, and so he had a storied career, Jim. He was, he had 38 years in the department, and he rose through the ranks. I think he ended up as deputy chief at the end. But he had just a fascinating career, and I think in his own right, there probably should be a complete book about him, but I did want to get a chapter about my father in my book, which I did, and it just kind of hit some of the highlights there. But yeah, his influence was pretty big, and he was a good guy. I know he was a great cop, and he introduced the family to other police officers. And so around those other police officers, whether we be at barbecues with them during the summer, or you'd get in a softball game and they'd say, hey, Kenny, your son, we need your son in right field. Can he play? It was a kind of a safe zone for me. These were the good guys. These were the people that protected and served the public, and so I always looked up to the police and my dad. So, in the back of my mind, I thought, down the line, I wouldn't mind getting into public service like this and becoming a law enforcement officer.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Myself being in law enforcement, I didn't have any model or individual that, kind of guided me to that. But I always appreciated folks that had law enforcement in their family. That was just kind of a different thing that I was kind of jealous of a little bit. So that sounds like it was a great environment to grow up in, and a great segue introducing you into law enforcement.
Yeah, yeah, it was, and I think the beauty of it was when I did finally get into law enforcement, and that was with the FBI initially. We Our careers overlapped by 2 years. He was on his way out. I had just started, but we had that 2 years together where he's in New York City, I'm in Newark, New Jersey. It's a short train trip into the city. And we would get together occasionally. He would introduce me to his friends, and I was still in awe of the man. I'd sit there at lunch with his friends, and I was still that kind of 10-year-old, 11-year-old in my heart, looking at him, saying, "Wow, Dad, you're the man."
Right.
So those 2 years were just amazing, and I don't think I could have scripted it any better than that.
Sure, absolutely. Now, you referenced being in the FBI. How long were you an FBI agent? And then where did you transition to afterwards?
Right. So I was an FBI agent for 3 years,
Hmm.
and I was on the Joint Terrorism Task Force in Newark. I I actually put in for New York and did not get New York. And I was a little bit miffed about that because I'm from New York City, and
Right.
the FBI had such a reputation. That office had such a reputation for working Russian spies and terrorism, and so I was disappointed. But I'll tell you, it was the best thing that ever happened to me going to Newark, because it was a much smaller office, and I didn't get lost in the crowd.
Hmm.
In fact, there was somebody higher up, had the foresight to say, "Hey, Strange has been in the Middle East. He speaks basic Arabic. He knows about the Middle East, the culture. He might be a nice addition to the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Maybe he can work Middle East, terrorism, or he speaks Spanish. Maybe he can work on Cuban intelligence matters, back up the other agents." So that prevailed, and it's kind of interesting because my boss at the time, he pulled me aside and he said, "I don't know how you got here or into the squad. And to be honest, I wouldn't want you on the squad. I didn't want you on the squad. You should be doing what other agents do when they first come on board. You do applicants. You go around and interview applicants for a year or two, kind of get your legs. So anyway, welcome aboard." But you know, anyway, so that was my
Quite a
welcome.
welcome.
Yeah, quite a welcome. But in the end, it turned out pretty well on that squad. I After 3 years, after the first, it was actually the first Gulf War ended. After that happened, I transitioned over to the U.S. Agency for International Development, Office of Inspector General, and I was actually recruited by two former FBI agents who were working for that agency. And the big attraction for that job was the overseas living and traveling and working. And I think one of the agents was in Egypt. He was in Cairo, and the other one was in the Manila. And so they said, hey, we need someone in Latin America. You speak Spanish. This would be a great job for you. Yes, it is a different discipline. You'd have to be working fraud, but we could teach you. So I transitioned after the FBI, transitioned to that agency.
Okay. Yeah, I bet that was an interesting career there.
Oh, it certainly was, and it was quote our little secret in the government. It was a tiny, just a tiny department. We did have auditors, we did have investigators, but I like the feeling of, hey, boss, I've got something breaking out in Nicaragua. We need to handle that. Okay, Strange, get your tickets and go. It was that type of thing. So I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed travel. So it was a great place to be for a while.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and transition into some of your experiences over your career and talk about you and I offline were talking a little bit, and I mentioned your book and reading your book and how it was just filled with fascinating uh, cases and experiences, and it was so difficult to pinpoint one or two things to talk about today, but kind of what I'd like to discuss is your book. I think it was chapter 22, and the chapter is titled Breakfast with the Warden. And I thought, although it wasn't a super long chapter, it was very interesting, very compelling. And I thought we'd talk about that to start with. So, um, just to give listeners an idea, it is a trip that you and a coworker took to the Altiplano Supermax federal pen
Hmm.
in Mexico, near, I think it was, and you can tell us, near Toluca, Mexico, or somewhere in that
That
region.
that's right.
And
It's
you
Yeah.
took a tour of the facility, you met with the warden, and as you were in that facility, you encountered a number of inmates, but three of them of particular interest that I wanted to talk about. So if
Right.
you could just kind of tell us a little bit about, hey, what caused you and your coworker to travel to that
Hmm.
facility and share your experience. And I'll try not to interrupt here, but I might interject a question or two. Okay.
No, please help yourself, please.
All right.
Yeah, no, this was about 2 years before I retired. And at the time, the Merida initiative had just come up, and this was kind of a bilateral initiative between Mexico and the United States. And I think the purpose of it was, again, to protect the citizens of both countries, Mexico and the United States, from the effects of basically drug trafficking. So I know the United States was providing all kinds of aid under the Merida Initiative. This would be equipment and training and conferences, and it was an amazing, just an amazing program. I believe, Jim, it's still in effect. It's still going. 16 years later, I think it was 2008. 2008. It started in 2008,
Hmm.
and so and this was at the tail end of my career, and I received an invitation from the FBI in Los Angeles, and they said, we need someone who's got a federal background who can do training for Mexican counterparts, people that are working in the Mexican federal system, like yourself, like ourselves,
Hmm.
and that are law enforcement officers, and in particular, you have a background in the Office of the Inspector General, And so this is kind of like an internal affairs unit. So Mexico needs this kind of internal affairs guidance and how to set up programs and how to make it work and how to hire and how to train. So that's when I heard that, and of course I love to travel, and I had been in Latin America with AID, U.S. Agency for AID. I jumped at it. And I said, I'm all in. And part of the reason it happened was because of a relationship I had with a FBI supervisor whom I met in El Salvador. When I was based in El Salvador, I met this FBI fella, tremendous guy, and we hit it off. And years later, he ended up in LA. I'm in LA, and then this invitation came up. So I joined two LA city attorneys, myself, and the deputy chief of public corruption, fraud and public corruption, Howard Sklamberg from Washington, D.C. So the two of us on this occasion, and these were, by the way, Jim, this was 2 weeks, two trips, 1 week each. And so
Okay.
we did a lot of work in each of those weeks. But in one of those weeks, I was invited. We were invited by the PGR, which is the Mexican Attorney General's office, and they said, we want you to take a look at our maximum security prison. We have a famous one. It's called the Altiplano, and it's out it's in the state of Mexico, near the city of Toluca, maybe 45 minutes to an hour away from Mexico City. And so we traveled out there. It was pretty interesting. We jumped in one of these these SUVs, bulletproof glass. The driver, and we had security. What is it? Loaded for bear, in case any of the sicarios decided to
Sure.
to
That's
to,
exactly what.
to stop us.
Yeah. Pardon my interruption, but as you're explaining this, that I'm actually reflecting back to the movie Sicario, and
Right.
those types of environments and atmospheres. It sounds super interesting.
Yeah, no, it was certainly exciting, but definitely in the back of my mind, I'm thinking we are not armed personally, so you're trusting your lives to your hosts.
Right.
And so Altiplano, it's got that incredible reputation for housing some of the meanest, baddest asses that Mexico has ever seen, and of course, it's got this notoriety now for the escape by Chapo Guzman. Yeah, I think it was back in 2016 or 15,
Yep, I think
with
so.
the famous tunnel. So, and
Right.
what was fascinating, if you remember the chapter, when we were having breakfast with the warden, and he was a very sarcastic guy. He was constantly berating us. I mean, it was passive aggressive. He likes
Hmm.
likes America, but you Americans are weak, and we have the best prisons in the world, and you Americans, I saw that where the helicopter came into one of your prisons and they escaped, and that would never happen here in Mexico because we're strong, and no one can ever break out of this place or get into this place, but in America you can. So we kind of we took our beating, I guess, because I guess the food was good, and we just kept,
There's
si
your
senor.
incentive.
Yeah, right. If we could just get through this. Is he
Right.
talking to us, Howard? What did he just say? Um, so we had breakfast with him. What was amazing, when you let me just backtrack. When you pull up to the facility, it's got armored cars there, and these those Mexican soldiers and police that you see in Sicario. Just
Hmm.
all with vests and helmets, and weapons of all kinds of these long rifles, and just a ton of security. I mean, definitely. I don't think people are going to break in. That's that
Right.
part is right. And then, when you got into the Altiplano itself, there were like 8 levels, 7 or 8 levels I counted of security. You'd go through the magnetometer. There were dogs. There were all kinds, being frisked personally, and then you go to the next and the next. And I think we counted like kind of 8 circles of protection, of security, just to get in, just to get into this place. It was mind-boggling. It was
It
actually
sounds pretty
mind-boggling.
extensive.
It was extensive. And of course, Altiplano, and it's got, I think I told you, it's got this new name now. It's like the Federal Readaptation Center #1, but everybody knows it as Altiplano. But we get inside, and we meet the warden, and he was gracious to the point. He said, let's have breakfast together, and he ushers us into this office, and it's got this most beautiful furniture. And then then the waiters are actually correctional officers that have put on like a jacket, for restaurant jackets,
Like a
and
maitre d' jacket.
yeah, exactly, and they're serving us. So the conversation was very interesting that we had with him. He was relatively new warden. He had been over in another penitentiary, actually off the coast, in a place called Islas Maria, where the where the prisoners can't get off because they're surrounded by water.
It's an island, right?
Yes, it's an
Yeah.
island. Yeah.
Yeah.
Islas Marias.
Huh.
So he had come from that area, and again, he was more interested in bragging about Mexican prisons rather than if you will, trying to find out or learn anything about our systems and anything he could pick up. It was kind of a one-way
Sure. So
street.
it sounds just like that, rather than,
Yeah.
have an ear to hear your suggestions and recommendations. He just wanted to tell you how great they were.
Right. And we talked about the problems that we have in our prisons, because at the time I was also working prison cases. Bureau of Prisons came under our jurisdiction, so I knew a little bit about the correctional system, and I was eager, and occasionally I would mention things about contraband, and what was interesting, when and it's in the book, when he mentioned that it's impossible, nobody will ever break in. Yeah, I concur. I just came through. I
Sure.
believe you. But nobody, he said, will ever break out. And that's when my partner Howard kind of okay, that's what you believe, but we find out that it's the insider that can make things happen, that can be bribed easily, and that can
Right.
facilitate prisoners getting out. If the money's good enough, and they're going to take it, and he said, no way, that will never happen. And of course, you and I know it did happen.
Sure.
With the famous Chapo Guzman in
Right. And
2015.
one thing I wondered about that is, and perhaps you don't know, because I don't know, was he the warden at the time Chapo escaped from there? Any idea?
No,
I know some time passed since your visit,
yes,
between then and the escape.
Yeah, that's right. I retired in 2010. He escaped, I think, in 2015.
Yep. Yep, I think you're right.
So 5 years had passed. You're right, but yeah, no, I did research. I don't think he was there for that. I think it was another warden, if I remember correctly.
Sure.
It was interesting. One thing I do remember is when we got to the prison, I kind of looked around, and of course, you had all these armored cars and armed soldiers or federal police or whatever they were, circling the prison. But off in the distance, I saw this this isolated, like, little house, like maybe you could see it maybe a mile or 2 miles away, and it was just standing out there by its lonesome. And I thought to myself, how odd. What is that? What is that? And my understanding is that when he tunneled out, it was to a place like that. And that may have been the place where he came out and was taken away. I just thought it was the oddest thing.
Sure.
Here they are. They've got 3 foot, 3 feet walls. The walls are 3 feet thick. They don't allow cell phone transmissions for like 6 miles.
Right. I
It's
read that
all
in your book
right,
there.
right.
Yeah.
And here is this kind of little it was bigger than a shack. It was like a place where you might store crops or something, but it
Hmm.
just seemed odd sitting out there.
Sure. Yeah. And that's something I was going to ask you is on your approach to the facility, was it like a desolate area? Was it mountainous? Was it desert? What type of
Yeah, yeah.
area was that in? And in addition to that, the facility itself, I think in the book you referenced it kind of reminded you of like a pyramid in the middle
Yes,
of
yes.
a desert. What type
Yeah.
of structure was it? Was it a multi level, multi stories? Just to give us a brief description
Yeah,
of that.
yeah. I mean, it was this thing that just kind of loomed up. You could see it like from miles away in this kind of flat, desolate, arid place. I mean, it obviously was an agricultural area, but for some reason, it was dry and the crops seemed burnt, and it was just kind of unending flatness. And then all of a sudden, like I mentioned, like this Aztec pyramid, it just boom,
Yeah,
it was out there, and you're looking up at it, and you see these towers and the massive walls, and so that's what I was thinking. Kind of looks like an Aztec pyramid, and they're very popular in Mexico, of course, as you know.
sure.
But yeah, but it was a startling for me. It was a startling sight.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So in the purpose, as you said, was the Merida initiative to go there and share information with the warden. And it sounds like it fell on deaf ears with him. So, you have your interaction with him, you have your breakfast, and then
Mhm.
he takes you on a tour of the facility. Could
Yes.
you, explain, your interaction, your walkthrough, and
Yeah.
who you may have encountered during that?
Absolutely, Jim. What is interesting is the warden said, "Well, we have finished breakfast. Now let us go visit some inmates. Would you like that?" And I said, we said yes, so absolutely. Now it was his wish, and you could tell. He said, and he offered this, Jim. He said, "Let's go visit some of your American colleagues in prison here. Would you
Hmm,
like that?" And I was not interested in, I've been working my American colleagues for years. No thanks.
sure.
I said,
Yeah, you're in
I want. I
Mexico
said,
and
Warden, and I put him on the spot. We would love to meet some of your notable Mexican prisoners. The big ones. And
mhm.
so he was kind of you could tell he was hesitating. He just didn't want to do it. I don't think that was part of the tour. But Howard, he said, yes, this would be great. We would love to be your Mexican person. So finally, he had to give in, and
Mhm.
not that he wanted to, but so he said, okay, all right, all right. And so he took us for a tour of the facility, and then at the end of the tour, we came to the notable prisoners that were there, the big ones. And
Mhm.
the first one we met, and they were all kind of housed side by side, which I thought was very, very interesting. It was kind of one cell next to the next, and just all contiguous cells. So the first one is this: we meet this tall gentleman. He was at least my height, at least 6'3", maybe taller, and I recognized him immediately. And I thought, Jesus, this is the guy in that was the padrino, the godfather of the cartels. This is Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, and he is, he had that. If you see Narcos Mexico, he's played wonderfully by this Mexican actor, but he's the padrino there, and
Yeah, they
he
call
is
him El
also the
Padrone, right?
person that is complicit in the murder of Kiki Camarena, our DEA agent down in Guadalajara. So I'm like, oh my God, and this guy, the warden says, well, Miguel, these are two American investigators, and he kind of looked at us and went, yeah, yeah, oh, hi, hola, type thing, and then he looked away and he said, hey, to the warden, he said, my laundry. My laundry, it's wet, it's moist. What's the problem? and, and so he gets into this little argument with the warden about his laundry. In looking into this guy's eyes, I saw a stone cold killer. This guy, you had this creepy feeling, if you got between him and money or anything, or drugs, he'd whack you in a minute. He wouldn't hesitate. But what was unusual too, Jim, was the fact that he had a TV, had a small black and white TV in his cell. And I said to the warden, "What's this?" And he goes, "Oh, don't worry about that. It doesn't even work." And I didn't want to get into it, but I just thought that's odd. You're taking all these precautions with cell phones and this and that and the other thing, and here's this TV sitting in his cell. So that was Felix Gallardo, and his history is, well, Sinaloa cartel. I believe he was in there for many years, and then finally he ended up. I think he's under house arrest in Guadalajara at this time. And then he said, "There's another. I want you to meet another fellow." And this was. I thought he looked familiar, but I wasn't sure who he was. And then he said, "This is Eduardo Arellano Felix." And then I went, "Oh, okay. This is the AFO. This is the Arellano Felix organization out of Tijuana, and this is Eduardo. I think they call him the doctor." And so he had just been arrested, and he's a former leader of the Tijuana cartel. So, and the Arellano Felix organization, again, if you see Narcos Mexico, you'll see the tremendous battles that the Sinaloa cartel had with AFO and vice versa. So another notable narco, king. And probably the most surprising for me, and this was purely accidental, Jim, while we had finished coming out of that, we met these two kingpins. He said, let me show you to our infirmary. We have a state-of-the-art infirmary. You're going to love this. And it was. I mean, it looked very nice. Looked like a very clean, modern, and maybe it was staged. It was suggested after I did the whole thing that this was staged. Maybe it was, but I kind of went off script. The warden had a certain script here. Now, so when we got there and we're kind of looking around meeting doctors, I see a patient that's sitting on this bench, or and he's bare chested, he's moaning, and I just instinctively went over to him and I said, "Senor, are you okay?" And he said, "Oh, I have so many problems, health problems." And so we're talking. I said, "Are they treating you well?" "Yeah, they treat me well. I'm not in this prison. I'm coming from another prison, but this has a very good infirmary, and that's why they sent me here." An older gentleman, and and then the warden says, "Well, this is Don Neto. And Don Neto is visiting us from another facility." And I did not pick up on Don Neto until later. And then I patted him on the back. I said, "I hope you feel better, sir." Not realizing that this was, in front of me was this Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, aka Don Neto. And Don Neto was a Mexican drug lord. He was a former leader of the Guadalajara cartel. He shows up in Mexico Narcos as well. He is involved with Kiki Camarena's death in some way, shape, or form. So that was really shocking for me. And there he was, and I'm patting him on the back. He has his shirt off, and I remember, he was hairy, kind of a hairy guy, and I'm like, "Gee, maybe I should, when I get back, I'll wash off of it."
Yes, and Germex.
That was amazing when I found out. And but it was when we got back, I got a call from one of my Mexican counterparts, and he said, "So you went out to the Altiplano, did you?" And I said, "Yeah, it was pretty interesting." And he said, "You do realize they staged everything for you?" And I said, "Well, it is what it is, right?" But
right.
Yeah, that was our journey to the maximum security prison.
Sure. Yeah, and I just thought listeners would find that interesting, just simply because of the the lack of willingness to learn. No, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I thought we lost volume there, but I can hear
Okay,
you.
okay.
I can
Yeah,
I
the
can hear you.
lack of willingness to learn or listen to you all making suggestions. That's the whole purpose of the initiative. And then explaining the security and the layers of that maximum security prison that El Chapo ultimately escaped from. And then, these are for listeners that are not law enforcement and are not aware of these individuals that you just described. They are very significant
Ooh,
in the drug cartel world. And they're
yeah,
just not local drug dealers selling, a couple pounds of weed or kilos of
right,
coke here and there.
right.
They are instrumental in drug trafficking around the entire world.
Exactly. Exactly.
And
And yeah, you're right. And Chapo, as you know, was involved with these gentlemen. He was actually just a few layers down from them, and but he was working for them. That's what Chapo was getting his experience. So yeah,
mhm,
they were very powerful in their day.
yeah, and then circling back just a little bit, again for listeners that just are not aware of the murder of DEA agent Kiki Camarena. That was an event that occurred. I think it was like February, and you correct me if I'm wrong, February 1985. Kiki was essentially kidnapped by, it was alleged, corrupt law enforcement officers hired by one of the cartels. I think it was perhaps the Guadalajara cartel. And these two individuals that you met inside that facility, El Padron and Don Neto, they were allegedly involved in the plot to do that, to
Right.
kidnap, torture, and murder the DEA agent. That's how ruthless these individuals are. And my understanding, doing
Absolutely.
just a little bit of research about that
Yeah.
incident involving Kiki, he was tortured, and they had a physician there administering drugs to keep him conscious so
That's
he
right.
could be aware of the pain
That's
that they were
that's right.
inflicting upon him. It was a very terrible, terrible event, and
Gruesome.
and these folks were involved in that.
That's right. And that's the horror of this, knowing that you're just a few feet away from people who had orchestrated that gruesome murder. I mean, they tortured him and they kept bringing him back to life, and they tortured him again. It was just horrible, just awful. And here they were, just a few feet away from you, and we kind of felt like we're in a zoo, kind of looking at these strange and exotic animals. And
Sure.
in some respects, they are animals.
Right. And it's one thing to read about them in a law enforcement intelligence bulletin or to read about their activities in a law enforcement report, but to be up close and personal and see and observe them, that's got to be a whole nother ball game.
Yeah, and I got a chance to just ask a few questions of each of them in Spanish. It's kind of interesting. Especially with the Arellano, Eduardo Arellano. Now there's something off with him. There's something, he's maybe he's on the autism spectrum somewhere. He's a different cat. But
Mhm.
I just asked him, how are they treating you here? And he was very polite. He was the most polite person in that cell group, and he said, "Yeah, it's okay. I'm okay. They're treating me okay here." So
Hmm.
kind of interesting. But the rest of the family is like, they are some bad people.
Right, right. Before we kind of transition into our next topic here, just a couple follow-up questions. I know a lot of folks, when they think of a Mexican jail or they think of a Mexican prison, they think of some dimly lit, shabby little facility.
Mhm.
That's not the case with this Altiplano,
No.
correct?
Yeah, no, it was built, I think, in 1980, 1981. So it wasn't that old. It was like 20 something years old. So it's relatively new. It's very large, and Again, they probably spruced up the place for our visit. So I didn't come away saying, "Oh my God, this is one of those hell holes that you hear about on National Geographic."
Correct.
The worst
Exactly.
prisons in the world. No, it was nothing like that.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, that was a super interesting explanation of that incident there. Let's kind of transition into the overall Merida initiative, and you had kind of given a brief description of it there at the beginning of our conversation. And as a federal agent myself, I had always heard about this and was just generally aware of it, but I didn't have any experience myself traveling to Mexico or participating in this initiative. So I think it's going to be interesting listening to you talk about it. But I just a little bit of information that I found in my preparation for our conversation today is that the Merida Initiative, like you said, is an agreement between the U.S. and Mexico. It's a joint strategic priority mission, and again, as you said, equipment and training, equipment including air assets, helicopters, computer
Hmm.
systems, firearm simulators, anything you can imagine to
Right. Right.
cooperatively train these individuals. And it's been going on for quite some time. And, in the grand scheme of things, I think, and this is my personal thought, that it is somewhat effective and it's better than nothing. It's better
Yeah.
than doing
Yes.
nothing.
Correct.
I don't think I think you and I could spiral down a rabbit hole here today and discuss drugs and drug
Hmm.
investigations and drug
Hmm.
trafficking.
Right.
And we're not going to do that. But if this program didn't exist, I think the problem would be worse out there.
Yes. I
What are
believe.
your thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. I believe that it's better than nothing. There have been mixed reviews about Merida, about the initiative. Of
Hmm.
course, we were there I think there were like four pillars to the program.
Hmm.
The pillar that we were there for was called the institutionalizing the capacity to sustain the rule of law. And then if you go like a subheading of that, which is why we were there directly, was we were offering technical assistance, advice, training. We were doing we would do investigative training, how to conduct interviews. But we were also putting together for them. We would find out what they were doing, what their needs were, and to be honest with you, they really didn't have a very good internal affairs mechanism to, and corruption, in Mexico, it's
It's
rampant, but
rampant. Yeah.
it's rampant. And the thing is, I knew while I'm working with these people, there's probably out of 10 young men and women there that I'm working with, probably three or four of them are probably going to end up compromised, but that's
Sure.
another story. But we were there to again. We wanted to show them what we are doing and how we function, and so we mapped it out for them. We told them how our intake was for complaints, who makes the decision on which cases to work and not. Talked about investigators and caseloads, how to go out there, do the investigations, how to write up the reports, how to to work with a prosecutor. So we laid all of that out for them, and then we asked them, what would you like to have? What's your wish list?
Hmm.
And they said, we'd like to have pen and paper, pads, simple
Wow.
things, just, I was
Wow.
shocked. I was shocked, so right away,
Sure.
Howard and I, he's the deputy chief of public corruption. And, he's like, oh my God, we need to come on, let's write up something. And so we did this thing we wrote up for some of the, I guess it was the attorney general in the U.S. at the time. I forget who it was, but we sent our report and said, look, these people, if for them to function well, they need the rudimentary equipment, like pens. And for me, it was shocking. We basically provided the blueprint for them on what their internal affairs office should look like and how it should function in a perfect world. So, we laid it out, intake and who makes the decisions regarding opening cases and what the threshold is, and agents, how many cases do they normally work, and how they work with prosecutors, all of the how to close cases, all of these things, how to interview people. And so we did all of that. And then when we asked them for a wish list, we were astounded because they needed the most rudimentary items, the basic items. Not enough writing tablets, not enough notebooks, not enough pens, no tape recorders, just the basic stuff. Could they get a tape recorder? Oh yes, they could, but it would take maybe a week, and they'd have to kind of go to different agencies and say, could we borrow? And that. So
Yeah.
it was frightening, scary, and shocking.
Sure, absolutely. It sounds like it. And we kind of take that stuff for advantage. American law enforcement, paper clips, notepads, recorders, cameras, all that stuff readily available at our fingertips when we need that stuff. And it's just kind of mind blowing a little bit to hear that in the 20th and 21st century, these are things that they're asking for to just simply
Right.
do their job.
That's right. Yeah, it was, and we Howard and I could only hope for the best. We did furnish the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Attorney General's office in Washington, the Merida agency, the people that basically sponsored Merida in the U.S. and we sent their list, the Mexican list, into them, and hopefully they responded. Hopefully,
Sure. Yeah. And going back to what we were saying earlier about the success of this initiative, it's agents and law enforcement like yourself going there and sharing their knowledge that can benefit Mexican law enforcement that, I think is helpful to those agencies. And like we said, if we weren't doing this program, it would most likely be much worse out there. So I found
absolutely.
that I found that description, your experiences are extremely fascinating. Like I mentioned, I've been in law enforcement myself 30 years, and
Hmm.
I've never actually talked with anyone directly that participated in that program and
Yeah,
heard firsthand how it really is down there. So super
yeah.
interesting story.
Yeah, what's just a kind of footnote. After I retired in 2010, I took a job with a German manufacturing company. It's a big one. I don't want to mention the name, but and I became the head of compliance investigations. I was based in Mexico City, and I ran an office that covered the company's work throughout Latin America and South America. And so in Mexico City, I lived there for 2 years, and I got a chance to kind of circle back with some of these people in Mexicans that I met in Merida. So it's very nice to kind of touch base with them again. Um, there were some successes they were telling me about. Some things didn't pan out, and always in the background, this hovering was this thing about being compromised, about being corrupted. It was always there, and I really felt bad for law enforcement because they had some tough decisions to make, if you know what
Right.
I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. And without getting into, great detail about that, it's a different lifestyle in that country, and law enforcement they're subjected to the ruthless behavior of these cartels that have no cares about committing violence, and they will commit violence against
Right,
law enforcement family,
right.
friends, and they have a very distinct way of coercing people.
Oh yeah.
But
Oh
having
yes.
said that, you know, not every law enforcement officer or agency is corrupt in Mexico. It's just
No.
simply a different problem
Hmm.
to a greater degree in that region. I
Uh,
believe. So,
yeah,
kudos to you for sharing your knowledge and information. I think it's a well-intentioned program that's been beneficial overall.
I think so.
Um,
Yeah.
but and you mentioned it here a little bit earlier. You retired from the FBI or you retired in, was it 2010, did you say?
2010. Yes.
Tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about what you've been doing since then.
Right. So, I mean, from 2010 to 2016, I was working in the private sector. I had several gigs. One of them was with that German manufacturing company, but I also did some work for a scientific glass and ceramics company upstate New York as well. I headed up investigations there. That was an interesting challenge because this was the first time that I came up against the Chinese government, the
Hmm,
CCP, and our company had the secret sauce that the Chinese government wanted. So it was a they talk about cyber stalking, cyber attacks, you know, uh, compromising our people on the ground, offering them bribes
sure.
to go in there with a thumb drive and download stuff and take photos. And so it was a very, very interesting experience. And then finally, my last private gig was with a pharmaceutical company out here in California. So I did that. And then, I kind of got to the point where I was making a lot of money, but I didn't have that job satisfaction. And
Hmm.
I decided to get off the treadmill, corporate treadmill. And so I started up a PI business I guess it ran about 6 years. And I shut it down about 6 months ago because I now getting into books and writing books. And I just needed more time. I still have a part-time work with a federal contractor. I do background investigations,
Oh,
so
okay.
that's part time. It keeps me busy, keeps me out of my wife's hair,
Sure.
um, if you will. So that's what
Mhm.
I've been doing, but more now, Jim, kind of focused toward, writing the books I've always wanted to write.
Sure. And we mentioned your one specific book that contained the stories here today. Tell I think, I can't recommend it enough. How can listeners get a copy of that book? Where can they purchase that?
Thank you. Yeah, so it's on Amazon. It's in Barnes and Noble as well. It's hardcover. I'm working towards getting the soft cover up to save everybody some money
Hmm.
there, and also the for some reason the ebook dropped, and so I'm back with my publisher. Yeah, that's the
There we
book.
go. That's it.
Yeah,
I highly recommend it.
Cop's Son. Thank you. So yeah, Barnes and Noble, Amazon. It's 5 star. Everybody that likes it gives it 5 stars, which is wonderful. As an author, that's wonderful feedback for me. And then I have a website where I do blogs as well. It's Kenneth Strange, one word.com. Kenneth Strange, one word.com. Go up there, you can read. I do a lot of writing, different topics, all over
Yeah,
all
yeah,
over.
not just law enforcement. You write about other topics and
Yeah,
travel and etc.
yeah.
And you're in preparation for today's conversation, taking a look at your website. Very interesting stuff on there.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. Is there anything else? Is there anything that we maybe glossed over or missed in our conversation today, or any last words that you might have before we conclude this episode?
You've been very comprehensive covering this. Maybe I just want to say something about what I've found is I'm not alone out there. Law enforcement officers that are now starting to write their stories, tell their stories. It's becoming more and more prevalent now, and I'm actually one of the joys of writing and writing a true crime book and is getting in touch with some of the other former feds or former law enforcement, whether they be a DEA agent or a Border Patrol agent writing his book, or some deputy sheriff. I've been reading some of their stuff. They read my stuff. We talk. We swap things, and that's been such a joy for me to reconnect with my roots and with others. And as I mentioned to you before the show, I would love, and maybe you and I can collaborate on this. I would love to put together another book, but not of my stories, but of their stories, because when I did my research, they wouldn't stop talking to me. They listen to this, and then I worked this case, and you wouldn't believe it. Oh my God! And they were incredible stories. And I said, man, I gotta circle back after I'm done and do this book. And happy to do it with you.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Like I said, we were talking offline before we started today. There are endless, countless stories that are incredibly fascinating that people that are not in law enforcement have no clue about, that I believe they would find very interesting. And I think it would perhaps increase respect for law enforcement. It would shed a positive light on law enforcement. People learning about the different stories that different officers, agents, investigators, inspectors, etc., have experienced. So I think that's a great idea. I think we should, have a conversation about that. So I appreciate that. Again, Ken, thank you for being a guest today. I really
Thanks. Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Um, and I'd like to, again, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know you've got a lot going on, sharing your valuable insights and experiences today on the Right to Remain Silent podcast. It was an honor to talk to you today. And
Thank
I'd
you,
like
Jim.
to,
Thanks.
yep, thank you. And
Thanks.
I'd like to transition to our listeners. And I want to thank you for listening to the podcast. And I would just ask that you please like, follow, subscribe, and share so that I can continue to bring you high caliber guests like Ken to share their stories with you. So thanks, everyone, and stay safe out there.
Thank you.
The Right to Remain Silent podcast is brought to you by Streetwise 360 Studios. I would like to again thank today's guest for sharing the story right here on the podcast. Please remember to like, follow, share, and recommend us so that I can continue to bring you high caliber guests sharing their experiences, just like we heard today. If your law enforcement agency is interested in training provided by Streetwise 360, or if you know someone that has an interesting law enforcement story to share, please contact me via the website, www.streetwise-360.com, www.streetwise-360.com.